Welcome everyone to this week's video. Today we are on Fish Friday number 121 and we have a good one for you today. Today's fish is one of the most beautiful fish you'll find in the United States. Extremely popular with anglers and for good reason. And you'll easily see why. Today's fish that we're going to be talking about is the cutthroat trout. Now, the cutthroat trout, or scientific name Oncorhynchus clarkii, again that's Oncorhynchus clarkii, it is part of the family Salmonidae, which is the family of salmon and trout. Who would have guessed? Salmonidae, salmon, trout. Anyway, as you can see, we can move on from that. The cutthroat trout is one of the most beautiful fish. It is native to Western North America. The easiest way that I can show you this is actually to show you a range map. It's native to these Western North America. You can see it extends up into Alaska right here. It does exist in Canada, don't get me wrong. It's been introduced to other places. It's very, very easily propagated. A lot of people love fishing for this, so there's a lot of federal and commercial fish hatcheries that raise cutthroat trout to be spread across the world. Not necessarily a good thing, but at least it's a native fish, I guess. But think of like Alaska through Northern California, throughout the Rocky Mountains. It is part of the family, or the genus Oncorhynchus, which is considered the Pacific salmon and trout genus. Salmo and Salmotruta. The Salmo genus would be your eastern Atlantic species of trout. Just a little interesting fact about the cutthroat trout. It actually has the second largest native range of all the North American trout. I believe it's the lake trout that has a bigger range, but I'm not entirely sure. Like most salmon and trout, they require very cold, clear, shallow rivers and streams, usually with gravel bottoms. It needs to be extremely well oxygenated. It cannot be dead water. It must have that high oxygen content. Now, some of these can actually go into like cold, moderately deep lakes, but cold water, if you didn't know, cold water actually holds more oxygen in it. So the colder water is, the more dissolved oxygen that can be contained in the water, up to a certain degree. Obviously, can't survive in ice, but cold water actually does hold more dissolved oxygen. So these fish actually rely on high oxygen content, which is kind of related to that cold water. A little interesting fact about the cutthroat trout is that when people think of salmon and trout, they think of fish that are out in the ocean and then come into land to reproduce. The cutthroat trout, actually most of the populations stay in fresh water throughout their entire lives, and they're known to be non-migratory, meaning they stay there. They might move upriver and downriver. I'm not saying they don't have complete non-migratory patterns. I'm just saying that they stay in the river. Most populations. There are some coastal populations, you know, when you think of like these far on the western edge of California, the western edge of whatever this state is. This is Washington. Geography. Those will actually, they're almost like semi-anadromous. Anadromy is the actual term for the salmon that are actually out there, living in the ocean and coming in to spawn. The adults of the cutthroat trout on those coastal populations will move out in the ocean to feed, but usually come back fairly regularly, not just to reproduce. In terms of size, it is a medium-sized fish, I would consider this, but that's really, really hard for me to say, because different groups and different populations of this fish grow to different sizes. So this is kind of on the smaller side of the fish, but it's a good close-up. That's why I wanted to show you this. Different groups go to different sizes. Most of the populations grow anywhere from 15 to 102 centimeters, which is 6 to 40 inches. That's a massive range, absolutely massive range. 15 to 102 centimeters, 6 to 40 inches, that's massive. Most of them weigh from 1 kilogram to 7 kilograms. That's 2 to 15 pounds. Completely variable. It's actually mind-boggling. And some populations are actually significantly bigger than that, consistently bigger. The world record for this fish is 99 centimeters, 39 inches, 19 kilograms, 41 pounds. That is a massive cutthroat trout. And the thing about it is that population of cutthroat trout, it's in Lake Tawanaka? Tawatonka? I don't know. I believe it's in Idaho. I can't remember exactly where that world record is caught. We will find out right now. Let's see. That's not it. World record. Pyramid Lake of the Lahontan cutthroat trout. Okay, there you go. Pyramid Lake. That population is known to produce a lot of cutthroat trout that are over 10 pounds, which is about 5 kilograms. So, extremely variable in the size, but they're actually extremely variable in their coloration. They'll be golden, they'll be gray, they'll be green on the back. Pretty much the most consistent thing is dots, spots that are much more concentrated towards the back than the front. And then if you notice, they have this most populations, not all of them, have this distinctive sort of cutthroat where it got its name from. It's got that distinct line that begins kind of under the jaw that comes back and goes right below the gill flap. That's extremely common. Otherwise, it's kind of like most other salmon and trout. Very small scales, conical head. It's got teeth, relatively large mouth, large eyes. Got spots on the eye sometimes you can see there. But you got to look for that cutthroat. But you can't necessarily say that that's completely accurate because some rainbow trout will actually get that sort of stripe. So you can't really say that that's all that you can do. In terms of what they eat, like most salmon and trout, they're just an opportunistic food. They're very, very predatory. They eat anything it can catch. That means caddisflies, stoneflies, ants, grasshoppers, fish eggs, crayfish, anything is there. Smaller fish, they love to eat, which is why they're so heavily sought after as a game fish. They produce a bite. You can fish for them relatively easily. I say relatively easily, like you still got to work for them, but they're very popular for fly fishermen. I love fly fishing. I unfortunately have never gotten a Rio Grande cutthroat trout, but I would love to do that. Anyway, now, excuse me, for the interesting fact that we're going to end the video on, this fish species I have a generalization. I don't like subspecies most of the time. I think I've stated that before. I don't really like subspecies because, in my opinion, subspecies can cause a lot of regulatory issues that could be better served to either going to protect full endangered species or not. And if it is a viable subspecies, should it be its own species? This fish species kind of violates that rule for me. The cutthroat trout has 14 subspecies. 14 different subspecies. You can see right here. Let me zoom out for a little bit. These are all the species. The Humboldt, the White Horse Basin, the Alvord, Paiute, Lahontan, Colorado River, Greenback, Yellowfin, Rio Grande, Bonneville, Snake River, Fine Spotted, Yellowstone, West Slope, Coastal, all come from the cutthroat trout. The cutthroat trout subspecies, I don't like subspecies, and I do think these are split a little more than they should be. However, this many subspecies probably means that there is a ton of, not a ton, but it means that some of these are actually viable different species. Meaning, I do think that the genetics, and I believe they're always looked at, need to be looked at further and see if they can do there. These species are actually separated because of geographical isolation. If you go back to the map, it's very easy to say that this subspecies, is pretty geographically isolated from these, and especially from these, because obviously over here, not obviously if you're from Europe or anything, but on this side of the map, you're talking about the opposite side of the continental divide. There are 3 subspecies that have evolved populations east of the continental divide, which is the Rockies. And if you really think about it, the western end of the Rockies, all water flows that way. Eastern side of the Rockies, all water is flowing this way. So you wouldn't think that there'd be fish that are realistically related. There are 3 subspecies that evolved this in the Yellowstone River, the Missouri River, and the Arkansas River. Arkansas and Platte, I believe. And there's so many subspecies with such a large range that having those 3 on the eastern continental divide means that geologic time, way back when, there was probably a pass that allowed the fish to migrate over the Rockies, and then they got separated due to whatever sort of conditions. It's really bizarre, and probably needs to be its own species. I mean, it's really cool. And even beyond that, cutthroat trout, just another little interesting tidbit, and the interesting fact is all about these different species. There's more than one state that actually has a subspecies of cutthroat trout as their state fish. You have the greenback cutthroat trout, which has these dark green spots. You can see the spots cut towards the back, but you don't really see that harsh red line. You might see it in more adults, but then you also have the Rio Grande cutthroat trout. Spots concentrated to the back, line continues on throughout the entire belly. And if you look at the Rio Grande cutthroat trout, you can see it all throughout this. You can see predominantly usually has this redder belly. This one almost has no spots. Beautiful fish. But the greenback is actually the state fish. Greenback cutthroat trout is actually a state fish of Colorado, and the Rio Grande cutthroat is the state fish for New Mexico. Bizarre. Now, unfortunately, even with all these subspecies that have incredibly large ranges, you look at the map and you think, oh, this fish is everywhere, it's doing well. There are actually many populations of this fish that are in severe decline and are in trouble, and some are even extinct, I believe. And that's usually due to a historical overfishing. In Yellowstone, the Yellowstone River cutthroat trout, it was fairly common apparently to catch 100 fish in a day when you went angling, of 2 to 5 pounds, which is a mature fish, meaning that you basically took 100 adults out of a population, which just dramatically reduced the amount of biomass, which can hurt the population growth. Now, there are still threats to this day for the cutthroat trout. The most severe threats that are currently there is that a lot of trout species can actually breed with each other. Rainbow trout being one of the most common, and in fact it creates its own little fish. It's called a cutbow. The cutthroat and the rainbows interbreed, and apparently it's very You can actually look and identify it. I can't. I'm not a trout fisherman. I would love to. I love trout and salmon. But cut bows create this hybrid that can create competition. And what's even worse, but not necessarily worse, is that different subspecies of cutthroat can breed in between each other, which can actually kind of hurt if you're trying to restore a specific population. For example, you are trying to save the greenback cutthroat trout. Unfortunately, Rio Grande cutthroat trout get in there, and now you've got sort of a tainted, it's still cutthroat trout, but it's kind of tainted. So it creates a lot of problems, and rainbow trout have been put everywhere. We've actually done a video on cutthroat rainbow trout. I encourage you to go look at it, but it creates definitely a lot of issues. Anyway, sorry, this was a long one, but it's a beautiful fish, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much again. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. If I don't, please be safe. Have a great day. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you do. I'd really appreciate it. Hope to see you again. This was amazing. Thank you so much for the love and support. Please, once again, take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones.